Welcome to the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Ferguson, and I am your host. I'm a house flipper. I flip 10 to 15 houses a year. I own 13 rental properties with a goal to buy 100 by 2023. I'm also a real estate agent. I've been licensed since '01. I run a team of 9. We sell close to 200 houses a year. So on this show, we like to interview house flippers, landlords, and the best real estate agents in the business. So stay tuned for some great shows. If you want more information on my rentals, on the numbers, how I buy properties, check out InvestFourMore.com.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Ferguson with Invest for More. Welcome to another episode of the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. I have a really great guest for the show today, Marco Santarelli, who is with Narada Real Estate Investments. Marco has been investing since he was 18, took a little break, then got back into it again, and he actually runs a turnkey rental property company now. So Marco, thank you for joining the show. How are you?
I'm good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem. I appreciate you being on the show. I always like to tell the story of how people got started investing, how they got into the business. You got into it very, very young. So tell us how you got started, what made you want to get into real estate, and how did it go?
Yeah. Well, if you want to go back to the very beginning, I kind of knew as a teenager that if you really wanted to create wealth, you had to do it one of two ways. One is through building a business, and I had a few uncles who were self-employed. They had their own businesses, and I saw that they had a certain level of wealth. My family was not wealthy in any way, shape, or form. In fact, my mother had to work 2 jobs for many years just to help pay the bills and, pay off the mortgage and do that kind of stuff. The other way to get wealthy was through real estate. And again, we didn't own anything but our own home, but I saw other people had real estate. So I just knew that that was the way to go. So when I turned 18 and I could qualify for financing, I just took the plunge and jumped in. And quite literally, I just bought a townhome, an end unit. It needed some work, so I bought it, gutted it out with the help of my uncle who was a carpenter. So we fixed it up. I put a sign in the yard, started taking applications. I eventually leased it up, managed it myself. And looking back, the whole thing was very much textbook. And I didn't know what I was doing when I started because I didn't take a course or read a book. I just jumped in and thought, okay, yeah, this probably is not hard. But everything worked out well, and I kept that property for years, and it generated cash flow. My biggest regret with that first investment was selling it. If I look back, I probably bought it for about $40,000 or $50,000. And today in that market, that property is worth over $400,000. So I would have had a free and clear asset, worth about $500,000 that's still generating positive cash flow. So that's one takeaway is, buy and hold. And if you're in a good market, stay in that market. But that's how I got started. That was my first property, and then I got the bug, and from there I bought another property. It was a condo, and then I got my real estate license and sold real estate for a few years, and I really didn't like that. That's not what I wanted to do. But, as time went on, and then as 2003 rolled around, as you probably remember, real estate was on fire all around the country, and it seems like everybody and their dog was getting into real estate. So I went back into real estate after taking some time off. I took 2 years off prior to that, not knowing what I wanted to do because I was kind of the fallout of a .com bomb. That didn't work out, unfortunately. So I didn't want to go back into the corporate world, and I thought, well, I love real estate. It's really what I like. That's what I want to do. So I decided to become a real estate investor. And to make a long story short, and I can dive into more detail if you want, but effectively, over the course of the next 2.5 years, I accumulated a high water mark of 84 units. So I just thought I got to jump in and do this, and I did.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm curious, there's a lot of real estate agents as well as investors who listen to the podcast, and being an agent is great for some people, other people not so great. What was your takeaway on trying to be an agent? What didn't you like about that side of the business?
Well, to be blunt, I felt like I was chauffeuring people around in the backseat of my car. It's not exactly that way. It is a service-based business, and you have to look at it that way. But effectively when you're a real estate agent, you're self-employed. You've created your own job. And so if you don't get up in the morning and generate leads and go to work, you're not going to pay the bills. You have to keep generating new business in order to have those transactions close so you get a paycheck, a commission, and you can keep going. The smart real estate investor will realize that, okay, I'm living in a transactional business, and the only way for me to break out of that, in other words, to get out of the rat race, is for me to create passive income. And that's the key. If you can get out of the rat race, regardless of what you do, even if you like it, that's okay. But the only way to true financial freedom is to generate a passive monthly income that meets or exceeds your monthly expenses. Once you've done that, now you're literally financially free. And you could do whatever you want, whenever you want. And that's the key. You just have to reinvest some or all of the funds you make into income-producing assets. And, obviously my favorite's real estate, so that's the key.
Right. Nope, makes sense. And when you were an agent, were you still investing, or were you just focused on being an agent?
I wasn't selling real estate for too long. I think I was licensed for about 2 or 3 years and sold real estate for that period of time. I had a small business on the side, so I was kind of moonlighting. I was doing two things at once. But what I did is I did take whatever commissions I made and reinvested it into my businesses, and I took some of that, including commissions. I mean, you can get creative as a real estate agent. You could, as long as you disclose everything, you can take your commission and apply it towards your own purchase as part of the down payment. So, if you want to do it that way, you could do it that way in the right markets.
Right. Nope, that makes sense. Okay, very cool. So then you took a break. You got back into the real estate business. How did you get that many units so quickly? What was your plan going back into the real estate business?
Good question. So, financing was pretty easy back then. I have to give a lot of credit to, the grossly over-subsidized financing that was available back in the early 2000s, thanks to the policies of the government at the time. And, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, being government-sponsored entities, they're really backed by the government. So they'll take and buy loans, but they made policies so simple back then that you could almost literally fog a mirror and qualify for financing. In fact, it was crazy. At one point, you could get up to 130% of the purchase on I can't remember if that was purchase or refi, but I mean, it was crazy. So financing wasn't hard. There were a lot of ways to get financing, not just through conventional, but even through portfolio lenders. I did take advantage of commercial loans because some of the properties I was buying were small apartments. So with commercial, they don't look at how many loans you have or how many loans you have on your credit report. And they look at the property first, and then they look at your credit score and your ability to meet fairly minimal requirements. But commercial financing wasn't hard. And then the third thing I used was some creative finance. I worked with sellers who were able to carry the financing for me for a short period of time. I mean, they're not there today, but they were able to carry the financing for me to the point where I either resold the property or refinanced the property and put new financing on it. But financing was pretty easy back then. I mean, it wasn't all that hard.
Right. No, I know what you mean. I remember those 120, 130% loans, and I kind of looked around and asked other people, like, does this seem like a good business idea for the banks to be doing this? But I guess we kind of found out how that all worked out a few years later. Very cool. So, and with these properties you were buying, was your goal at the time to hold them long term? Were you buying them, trying to, add value to them and resell them? What was your plan at that time?
For the most part, I was just buying to hold. But, I did make a lot of mistakes, and I did lose money on properties because I didn't do what I preach, from the top of a soapbox today to all our clients, and that is, do your due diligence. Make sure you know what you're buying, confirm the numbers, do your inspections, understand the neighborhood, not just the property. A lot of investors are pretty myopic, not all of them, but a lot of them, and they'll get so mesmerized by a property and how beautifully it's been renovated, or maybe it's new construction, but they'll be mesmerized by this property and the numbers really make sense to them, but then they don't look at the bigger picture. They don't step back and take a look at the rest of the properties on the street and that neighborhood and the demographics of that neighborhood and maybe the schools and crime rates in that area, and then step back even further and look at the big picture. Oh, okay, well, it's in a suburb of a particular market. What is the economy like there? Are there jobs? Is there job growth? Is that a trend that's increasing, decreasing? You got to look at the fundamentals. To give you an extreme example, a couple years ago we saw huge opportunities, quote unquote, in North Dakota. You just couldn't find housing. People were literally living in tents because there was such a shortage of housing. Well, the North Dakota market is what I'll call a one-trick pony. It's so heavily based on oil and gas that should something happen, like, oil prices plummeting down to $45 a barrel like it is today, what would happen in that particular market? It's very similar to other markets like Fort McMurray up in northern Alberta, Canada. I mean, it was crazy expensive how real estate skyrocketed. A shack became an $800,000 or $900,000 property. But when the economy turns, or you have an incident where you have oil prices drop to $40, $45 a barrel, well, guess what? Pink slips start going out, and all of a sudden people lose their job either temporarily or permanently. The demand for housing goes down, the demand for rentals goes down, and then prices follow. And so you can't be in those types of markets. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is don't get mesmerized by, the property without looking at everything and verifying everything. And that's how I lost money, because some of the properties I was buying were in, war zones in Detroit. You could buy, a $10,000, $20,000 house that would rent for $600 plus a month. And it's great while you have a tenant that's paying, but, if they're on subsidies, or they work part-time, or maybe they're unemployed and they're making their income from, miscellaneous type of jobs or drug dealing, whatever, things happen. So what you see on paper as far as your pro forma and what you expect to make at the end of the year is not reality. That's what you're hoping to see. But again, you got to be in the right place, the right market, right neighborhood with the right property and the right management team. That's kind of what we preach all the time. And I made those mistakes early on, more than once, and I learned the hard way. I ended up, firing my property manager and doing my management myself, and that was really hard. I learned a lot from it, but I came to realize that the ultimate solution for someone who's investing from a distance is to have a very good, full-service professional property manager, because you live and die by that property manager.
Right. No, great advice. And that is interesting how you said that. Detroit is another one of those places where it was, very heavily auto industry. When that collapsed, everything collapsed there. And yeah, just because you can buy a house for $5,000 or $10,000 doesn't mean it's a guaranteed win. When you looked at it a couple of years ago, they were just tearing down houses because they were basically nothing. So, no, great advice. I'm curious, were you investing in one market, multiple markets? Where were you buying properties at?
At the time, I was investing in Michigan, Florida, Georgia, and Las Vegas. I was looking at properties in Phoenix, but I never ended up buying anything in Phoenix. So those are the four markets.
And what made you pick those markets at the time?
You're going to think I'm kind of crazy, but in the beginning, I was kind of just following the lead of what other people were doing, and I kind of knew better, but I didn't really stop to put my thinking cap on and really think it through all the way. I just saw other people having success, and I just followed through with it. And I did have some success for a while. Not all of my investments worked out the way I wanted them to. Most of them were fine, but some of them I ended up losing money on. I'll kind of actually go off on a tangent with your question here a bit, just to kind of help answer, why I picked Detroit as one of the markets. This is kind of how I ended up starting, our company, Norada Real Estate Investments. Back in 2003, it was around June, I got an email out of the blue. I don't even know how I got on this list, but it was from Robert G. Allen. And if that name rings a bell, or for maybe your listeners who don't recognize the name, he's a very popular author. He's probably authored and co-authored about 20 books. He was considered one of the grandfathers of Nothing Down real estate. And he wrote books like Nothing Down for the 2000s. His first book was Road to Wealth, and these are all great books. And they're a little bit dated today, but the basic techniques still stand if you can do it in the right market. But he had created a company back then called EWI, the Enlightened Wealth Institute. And basically, it was just an educational body to bring people into real estate and then have them come into these courses, these workshops and boot camps. So I'm sure you've heard the story if you haven't been to the seminar, but they had this event on a weekend here in Orange County, California, up in Orange, and I just signed up for it. The first one they did was in September. I went, and there was probably 1,500 people in this massive ballroom at a hotel, and it was a 2-day event. The speaker, his name was Glenn. He was very entertaining. He had you riveted to your seat. I mean, you wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom if you had to go. That's how engaging he was. But he was talking about his success in real estate and how to invest in real estate and the possibilities and the potential, and it was very entertaining, and it was very enlightening, and everybody wanted to just get started in real estate investing. That's what it was about. So, you'd see people running to the back of the room with credit cards in hand at the end of the first or second day. I think it was a 2.5-day event. But it was just amazing how many people signed up for these 5- and 6-day workshops, these boot camps that were held in different cities. So I took 2 years off, as I mentioned before, so I had nothing else to do. So I thought, well, you know what, I'll just go and do that. So I signed up for it. And one of the events was held in Detroit, Michigan, and it was the Foreclosure Boot Camp. That was one of the first ones, so that's the one I went to. And the person who was teaching that particular boot camp was talking about all the great things going on in Detroit and how it's turning around and all the money being dumped into the downtown core, which was all true. There were pockets that were really being revitalized. But we all started drinking that Kool-Aid, and a lot of the people that went to that seminar started buying these inexpensive homes, in Detroit, and many of them were fixer-uppers, but we were fixing them up with the help of people that were there on the ground and that were being introduced to us. So that's how I got into the Detroit market. What was interesting, though, is a lot of these people who ended up taking all these different boot camps through EWI were still not educated. They still didn't know exactly what to do, how to find properties, how to analyze them, how to rehab them if that was what the strategy was. They just needed help, and they kept coming to me because I was buying a whole whack of properties at the time. They kept coming to me saying, hey, Marco, where did you find these properties? How did you analyze them? How did you get it set up? What did you look for? Can you find me some properties? And really, that was kind of the start to Norada Real Estate, is people were coming to me asking for help. They were coming to me asking for properties. And I thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe people really do need help for something that's a little bit more, quote unquote, turnkey. And that's how the business started. So it was in tandem with my own investing and in tandem with me investing in markets like in Detroit and Southwest Florida and Atlanta.
Oh, no, that's quite the story. I didn't realize that happened like that. So that brings up a number of interesting points. The first thing, there's a lot of real estate education out there, and I think it's tough to always know what the good stuff is, what the bad stuff is. But I mean, I'm not saying those programs are bad or don't have their value, but I always kind of get nervous, shy away when they're more about marketing and trying to get you to buy a system with a credit card right at their seminar than they are giving you information. But I mean, it sounds like at the same time that program obviously helped you get started and get investing in real estate too, though.
Yeah, it did. I think the sore point that I have with it is that people were forking out in the beginning. I think their basic program was about $15,000, and they eventually worked up their programs to $25,000 to $35,000. So there was a lot of people spending $35,000 on these programs. And it wasn't just the $35,000. You had to pay. They were all held in different cities, so you had to pay for your flight, your accommodations, your meals for 2 to 3 days at each of these cities. So you paid the tuition of $25,000 to $35,000 plus the travel to each one of these different cities. The education was okay. It wasn't great, but for many people, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. But the sore spot is that people were spending, $25,000, $35,000 plus when they could have taken those dollars and used it as a down payment to purchase 1 or 2 properties and have, a small portfolio right from the get-go with positive cash flow. They could have gotten into real estate investing instead of they spent it on these courses.
Right. And even if they lost their money and made a bad investment, they probably would have learned more by actually buying a house and going through the whole process than what you can learn sitting in a classroom. So no, and there's a number of programs out there now from different companies and groups that do the same type of thing with lots of marketing to get you to buy, and then very, very expensive. It's crazy to me, and the tactics they use to get people to find money too are not always the best routes to go either. But anyway, okay. So you started your turnkey company, but are you still investing yourself? Did you keep buying properties as you started that company?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a small advantage to having 150 properties plus or minus at any given time available on the website. Is you see deals come along all the time, every day. I'm currently in escrow on 2 properties right now. It was 3, but I gave one of them away to a client that was looking for something particular, and what I was buying myself happened to be exactly what he was looking for, so I gave it up. But I'm in escrow on 2 properties right now in the greater Kansas City market. And so yes, I do buy. I'm still investing today, and I do buy the same properties that we offer our clients that we have on our website. But there's a certain formula or criteria. I know you know this, Mark, but maybe your listeners are not aware of this, and I actually covered this in one of my earlier episodes on my podcast. I think it was episode 4. I called it Turnkey Real Estate Investing Defined. And a lot of people throw the term turnkey around pretty loosely. Most investors have a general idea of what turnkey means, but people define it a little differently. And for some people, it's simply rent ready. You're a real estate broker, so you can go to the MLS and pull a property off. And I know you've bought one of these properties because I've listened to your podcast. But you bought a property that was virtually rentable from day one. It probably needed just minimal work or cleaning. In fact, one of your properties had a tenant in it. So I would call that, I mean, it is somewhat turnkey, but it's definitely rent ready. There's not much you need to do to get that thing rented. It's just a matter of cleaning it and turning it over. But to take that to another level, you want to define turnkey as being something that you can sink your teeth into, something practical. And for me, what turnkey ultimately ended up becoming was the right market, the right neighborhood, the right property, meaning it's new construction or newly renovated, so there's no deferred maintenance. You can just take over, and you're not going to have to worry about any kind of maintenance or repairs for the foreseeable short term. Ideally, it has a tenant in place under professional property management, and of course, when we're talking about the numbers, it has to generate positive cash flow and an acceptable cash-on-cash return for the investor. Because that's what it's all about. If it doesn't cash flow from day one, it's not an investment. It's got to be putting money in your pocket. I'm a big fan of Robert Kiyosaki. I love his teachings, and a lot of the stuff that we talk about is based on Robert Kiyosaki's philosophies and principles. So, an asset has got to put money in your pocket. It has to generate cash flow. That's what it's all about. So that's an important factor. And I'm probably missing a few other bullet points here in terms of defining what turnkey properties and turnkey investing is, but that's what it is for us. And I think that is the best way for someone to build their portfolio if they are either a newbie just getting started, and they need the help, this is a great way to get your feet wet and to learn the business and continue building your portfolio. But even seasoned investors, people who have 10, 20, 30 plus homes will still come to us because they have, careers, they have a profession, they have family. Their time is limited. They don't want to be rolling up their sleeves and becoming a quote-unquote active real estate investor. So that turnkey model is really well suited for them because it allows them to build their portfolio in a relatively hassle-free manner. And they're still involved, but it is as passive as it can get. And I go on tangents a lot, so I'm not sure how I went down that road, but I know I was talking about something before.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was either, but it's some great information. And like you said, the turnkey definition changes based on who you're talking to. So as an agent, like you said, I'll see properties on the MLS that say, turnkey investment. And it can mean anything from vacant and, barely livable to a tenant in place, or maybe it's newly renovated. Like, so many people have a different definition of what turnkey is. And you're right, you really have to make sure your definition as an investor is the same as the definition of the seller who you're buying the property from. And I agree with you. Turnkey should be, either newer or renovated with a tenant, property manager, and like you said, another great point, the cash flow side. I see quite a few turnkeys out there that aren't really cash flowing, but they're betting on appreciation or, talking about how great the market's going to be. And I'm a huge proponent of buying for cash flow and hoping for appreciation, but never count on it because I'm not smart enough to predict what the markets can do. And I don't think the economists who study that stuff can predict it either. So it's cash flow is really what you have to base your investment off of.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You got the order correct. Cash flow should be the number one priority, should be at the top of the list. We try not to talk to investors about appreciation. If they bring it up, we'll talk to them about it, but we'll never discuss that or lead with it because it's hard to time a market. Now, granted, you can pick markets that are more prone to appreciation potential, but if that's your number one criteria, then effectively you're speculating. You're a gambler. The property needs to be a income-producing asset. That's what it needs to be. The appreciation will come along with it. That equity, as the real estate guys say, equity happens. So it happens in one of two ways. One is through the amortization of the loan. Your tenant is paying off your debt service. So your mortgage is being paid down by your tenant. And each month, that principal is reduced and your equity grows. And if you look at markets historically, they'll appreciate anywhere from 4 to 6, maybe 7% on average over the long term. So effectively what they're doing is they're keeping up with headline inflation, the CPI. So you'll get that appreciation over time. In fact, there's been some studies done not too long ago that have compared your relatively flat or what I call linear markets, particularly in the Midwest, to more cyclical markets that you'll find in coastal areas like California and on the East Coast that happen to appreciate and depreciate in very rapid cycles, sometimes in double-digit increases and double-digit decreases. And over the long term, what they have found is that a lot of these slower, more boring linear markets have actually kept pace or in some cases outperformed the long-term appreciation of these cyclical markets. So I got to find that study. I got to dig it up. I've heard of it. I just haven't found it, but I never really put the effort in. But I do know the numbers in some of the markets because we're in some of these markets like Kansas City and Indianapolis. And so the point I'm trying to make is don't bet on appreciation. Define your criteria, and this is what we tell investors all the time. Know what your investment goals are. Have a strategy, define your criteria, and then use that criteria to guide what you're investing in and where. And when we look at that criteria, which we help investors define, we take a top-down approach. We'll take that criteria and we'll say, okay, these are the markets that will help you achieve what you're trying to achieve with your investment criteria. That might be Kansas City, Indy, Birmingham, Memphis. Okay, now let's start looking at combinations of properties and neighborhoods. Within their criteria, they may have certain requirements in terms of the type of neighborhood. Is it an A minus, a B plus, whatever? Maybe they have bedroom bath requirements. Maybe they have a minimum cash flow requirement. Maybe they have a minimum cap rate requirement. Maybe they're looking for just a certain cash-on-cash return. And using that criteria, you can use a process of elimination to start eliminating markets, neighborhoods, and properties till you eventually boil it down to a short list. Now, when you have a short list, and anybody could do this, and it's not just with us, it's even doing it on your own, define your criteria, look at the markets or research the markets that will help you achieve those goals, narrow it down till you get a short list. Now start doing due diligence on those properties. So you look at the neighborhoods, make sure it meets your criteria in terms of economics, demographics, look at the cash flow on the property, find out what the condition is. You can request, at least with a turnkey provider, you can request a scope of work so you can see what has been done to that property. Ultimately, when you have that short list down to one or two properties, you put them under contract. Then the next thing you're going to do is order an inspection. You want a third-party home inspection to go through that property top to bottom. You want to make sure there's no deferred maintenance. Compare it to the scope of work to see that everything that was said to be done is done. The biggest things you're looking for in an inspection are things that I call must be done. You certainly don't want must be done items on there. You could have things that are meant to be done or what I call should be done. That could be a gray area, a matter of discussion, but you want to comb through that. And then, of course, you're going to have a huge laundry list of things that could be done, and those are just things that I call filler. The inspector is going to fill that inspection because they don't want to send you a blank report. So, that's the next item on your due diligence checklist. And if you do that, you'll actually build a portfolio based on your criteria, and you'll be very successful because now you'll have an income-producing asset under management that's generating positive cash flow every month. And now the key is to just, rinse and repeat. Just keep doing that and keep adding to your portfolio. And within 5, 7 years, 10 years, you should be at a point where you could hopefully be financially free.
Right. No, that's great breakdown of buying a turnkey property. I'm curious, with your experience in working with people, what are your thoughts on the financing aspect of turnkey properties? So many people are buying out of state. It's not always easy to get conventional loans. How do you feel about financing and different options for people looking to buy the turnkey properties?
Well, the best deal out there in terms of financing is, again, your conventional loans, your Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans, because they're government subsidized. You're going to have the lowest interest rate and the lowest down payment. It's 20% down, and you can get rates, in the neighborhood of 5% plus or minus for non-owner occupied. So your first four are usually the easiest to get because they have the lowest requirement, lowest credit score. It's 20% down. The next 6 conventional loans will be 5% more in terms of down payment, and you'll have a credit score requirement that's 700 or 720.
I think it's 720. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 720.
Right. So that would be your next 6. At that point, now you've got 10 on your mortgage, 10 on your credit report, and if you're married, if you have a spouse, strategically it's best to do those independently of each other. In other words, don't put both names on that mortgage, because if you're both employed, theoretically you could double the number of properties you can buy. So 10 on the husband's name, 10 in the wife's name. Now you've got 20 conventional loans. Now at this point, what you're going to have to start looking at are portfolio loans. So there's many lenders that we work with, and there's many lenders out there that do what are called portfolio loans. And so they're not, they're not your Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. They write their own rules. They may or may not sell those loans after they fund them, but it allows you to purchase additional properties. And with some lenders, they have no cap. So again, theoretically, you could purchase an unlimited number of properties using that conventional financing. The interest rates are a little bit higher than conventional, but they still work. They might be in the upper 5 or 6% range. And then there's some boutique lenders that will finance foreign nationals. We work with about 3 companies that will finance Canadians, almost any foreign national investor. And those rates are usually in the 7.5% to 8% range. But in the right markets, the numbers still work very favorably, and you can still get up to 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. So there's really no excuse for anybody that has decent credit and, some investment capital for a down payment, 15, 20, 25,000 plus. you can get started. I mean, there's financing options. There's a lot of financing options today. 2-3 years ago it was pretty tight, but right now it's opened up, and so there's a lot out there.
Right. No, I talk a lot about portfolio lending, and if you can find a great portfolio lender, they can make your life so much easier. Whether it's rental properties or even flipping, it will finance flips too, which many people don't know. No, that's great information. The foreign national thing as well. Many people don't realize, you can get a loan as a foreign national. It's not easy. It's not easy to find those lenders, but they do exist. And talking to people all over the world, the United States has a pretty unique real estate investment market compared to a lot of places where it's just really hard to make money.
Yeah, well, the U.S. is interesting because, again, we have these government-sponsored entities of Fannie and Freddie. We're the only country that I know of, and has been for a long time, that offers a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. That's unheard of, in other countries around the world. Canada has a 25-year amortization as opposed to our 30-year amortization. But in Canada, you have to lock in a rate for 3 to 5 years, and then after that term is up, you're effectively refinancing that loan at a new rate. So it's almost like getting a new loan every 3 to 5 years. I'm not a fan of that type of financing, but that's what they have. That's kind of what they're stuck with. I'm not sure how it works in Australia and the UK, but we're pretty unique here in the US having 30-year loans. In fact, a few years ago, if I recall, we even had a 40-year. There were some lenders offering 40 and even 50-year amortization loans. That's incredible.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about that when you're saying that. I remember those 40-year amortizations. I'm like, man, I wish I could get one of those now. That'd sure help my cash flow. But great information. Yeah, we really are in a unique marketplace in the U.S., and that's why so many people from around the world are investing here. Great information. So tell me, now, if somebody's interested in buying a turnkey property or they're interested in talking to you more about turnkeys, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you, to see some of your properties you have?
Well, we're pretty open about, having a strategy session. It's essentially a free call, it could be 15 minutes plus. It's funny how some of those calls end up being an hour easily. But anybody can just call our office and talk to one of our investment counselors. And what they're going to do is they're just going to talk to you about what you want to achieve, like what you're trying to do. Where are you today? Where are you trying to go? What are you thinking of doing? And that will tell us pretty quickly if we can help you or not. And if we can't, that's fine. I mean, we would have had a good conversation. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is just help people get their bearings straight so they can define their goals, their strategy, their criteria. The criteria will help define where they should be looking and what they should be buying. And we could, at a minimum, help guide people to figure that part out. And then if they want to work with us, great. If not, that's fine too. We're in about 10 different markets in the U.S., and that changes from year to year just depending on the economics of that market, the rent-to-value ratios, the economics, the fundamentals, how healthy the housing market is. And so, that's what we do day in and day out. And I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, should they call you? Should they go to their website? How do they announce it?
I'm sorry.
I'll have links in the article. But what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, probably the simplest thing to do is just to go to the website, because we have a contact form there and an 800 number as well that people can call from. And then the primary website is noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA, noradarealestate.com. And there's tons of articles, and there's actually a great free report there too called The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing, and it's a free download.
Right. Nope. And we'll send a link to that website on the article right up I do for the podcast. And you have a podcast yourself as well, so that's full of great information. Yep. So I encourage people to check you guys out for sure. I think that's about all I had for the show. I always like to ask people though before we leave, if someone's just starting out in real estate, trying to figure out investing strategies, what advice can you give someone who's beginning, trying to figure out where they want to go and what they want to do?
Oh, wow, that's a pretty broad question.
I know, that was really broad, but I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, I could probably take an hour answering that, and I know you don't want me to do that. So if someone's just starting out, what they should do? Well, okay, so here's what I would do. The first blog article on our website is called The 10 Rules for Successful Real Estate Investing. It's always at the top. It's a sticky post because it's really the starting point. The first rule of the 10 rules is knowledge. Knowledge is the currency of today. Without having knowledge, you are basically going to follow other people's advice, and you're going to be prone to doing what other people suggest you do or tell you to do, and you just become a lemming effectively. So what you need to do is educate yourself. That's the starting point. If you're just getting started and you need to just get put on the tracks and have the right mindset, read, Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you're past that stage, then get Gary Keller's book, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. There are a lot of great books out there to help educate you. There's some great podcasts. There's your podcast. There's, my Passive Real Estate Investing podcast. There's so much free information out there that there's no excuse for not educating yourself and building a knowledge base. The more knowledge you have and the more knowledge you apply, the more successful you're going to be. So you just can't educate yourself. That is the starting point. That is the key to it all. But you need to apply that knowledge. So the next step is to take action. And so start with knowledge, build upon that, get familiar with terminology and strategies and markets, and ask people questions, and that's really how you're going to accelerate your success.
No, that's great information. I would say too, when I first started out, I'd been an agent for a long time and flipping houses, but rental properties is just a completely different ball game. And I listened to some lenders and some other agents for investing advice, and they really had no idea what they're talking about. They're just kind of, telling me what they had heard over the years. And it taught me that even though they're real estate agents and professionals in the real estate business, you really want to listen to people who are investors, not just agents, not lenders, but people who have invested in real estate and want to do what you want to do. Because just because they're in real estate doesn't mean they know anything about investing. So I learned that a long time ago.
It's true. Yeah, most real estate agents, and this is not a put down in any way. It's just what they're trained in, but they're effectively salespeople. They're trained in real estate. They have to understand the laws, the real estate laws. But at the end of the day, they're trained, educated salespeople. It doesn't mean that they know how to invest or how to analyze an investment property. In fact, I don't know the statistics, but a very small percentage of real estate agents actually buy real estate as investments. And I saw a statistic not too long ago, the percent of real estate agents that actually own their own home. Many of them rent. So they're selling the stuff, but they don't actually buy the stuff. So
right. No, it's staggering. I saw that statistic too. It's been a long time ago, but I'm like, that is crazy how many real estate agents rent and don't even own their own house. And they're selling it. So, and investing is even, very few agents ever own investment property. So, you're right on with those points. So,
yeah.
Well, great. Marco, I think we're coming to the end of the time we've got allotted for this interview. Really appreciate everything you've talked about, advice you've given, really spot on many of the different ways I feel about investing as well. Thanks a lot for being on the show. Hopefully, look forward to talking to you again soon. And really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Marco. Have a great day.